we understand we have faults, but our faults can be rectified by just a little courage and hard work on our behalf, not Harry Reid's. This is not complicated. Folks, Mississippi stood as a watershed state in 2014. It will stand there again. We're just getting started. Our advantage is our youth. I don't have nearly as many gray hairs as Dad Cochran does. Not nearly as many as Ellie Barber does. So we're going to fight for true conservatism, true liberty, and true constitutionalism in everything that we do. And one of the things we've done recently is to focus our messaging. And then I want to answer your questions after I talk about this just for a second. Decentralization. What does that mean? Decentralization. Do you know, for a conservative, decentralization is the heartbeat of what we believe. We look at power and we see what it does to people. And so we recognize that if power is problematic, and it almost always is, that we have to make sure power doesn't find a centralized location. And the founders knew that. They created this incredible document to separate the power. First, among the branches. We call that the horizontal separation of authority or power. Secondly, among the states. We call it the vertical separation of power. And lastly, among the people. The theory being that if no one government is too centralized, the people maintain their liberties. You say, well, why is that? Why can't a government get centralized? It's really simple. When you centralize authority, what else do you centralize? You can't have one component of centralization of power and not have all the other things that make us imperfect. In other words, we all recognize we have flaws. So our flaws are likewise consolidated. When you consolidate power, you consolidate greed and avarice and ambition. You consolidate corruption.
How about stupidity?
That goes to my second point in a moment. You consolidate all of these negative attributes of human behavior, and our founders recognized that. They were imperfect men. They understood that, but they knew to diffuse the power meant that there would be experimentation and that liberty would be protected, even stupidity. Even stupidity. That goes to the second point, federalism. Federalism. We make sure that no one stupid idea can dominate the whole landscape. And we do that through issues, concepts called federalism, which basically means that states have the responsibility and the role and the privilege and right and obligation to experiment with policy. Our Supreme Court once called it 50 experiments in democracy. Well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, but the concept is the same, 50 experiments in the republic. If California wants to experiment with a knuckle-headed public retirement system that bankrupts the state, let's watch it and not copy it. Conversely, if Florida wants to experiment with Medicaid revisions that save the Medicaid program, perhaps we should copy it and not simply watch it. The point is, if you allow the laboratories of experimentation to take place, you find that stupidity can be corralled and controlled. But for the last 50 years, we keep thinking that Washington can do a one-size-fits-all approach, whether it's health care or campaign finance reform. You name the issue, Washington's touched it. And every time they touch it, invariably, they create a mess of things. Stupidity centralized in Washington, D.C. Spread the powers out. The Constitution speaks very clearly to this issue. If it's not in Article 1, Section 8, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. This is not difficult. You know, Barry Goldwater talked about the fact that, yes, certainly the government has a right to a legitimate exercise of authority, which means they have a right to spend a legitimate fraction of your money on that authority. It makes sense. Begs the question, what's legitimate? The answer, Article 1, Section 8. Anything outside of that, by definition, is federally illegitimate. But the states then can absorb the rest of those responsibilities. It's that simple. Your Constitution gives you the roadmap. It demands that roadmap. What does the 10th Amendment say? All power is not delegated along the way. It's that simple. Every vote you cast should be with a mind toward what can Texas do to regain its balance of powers in this system. And if Texas is regaining her balance of powers, So is Mississippi. That's the beauty of it. Lastly, the three core components of conservatism: decentralization, federalism, and a high moral tone. Now, this does not mean it's our place to mandate how people live their lives. Freedom respects differences. We're not here to mandate. Russell Kirk, one of the great conservative philosophers, once said, he said, "We're not here to be the correctors of mankind. We're here to be an example by which they may correct themselves." There's beauty in that statement. Better yet, there's liberty in that statement. Sometimes we get impatient. We want to pass a law federally that speaks to every conceivable issue. That's the great trap of our government. It's not our fight to remake the whole country in with our wishes or in our perception or image. Texas should be quite proud of Texas, and Texas should respect Massachusetts' right to mess up. That's the beauty of our system. And that's the other thing I always think is interesting. As conservatives, we get so worked up every 4 years about trying to elect a president. You notice that? And we believe that somehow if we just elect the right president, everything's going to be okay. You know, the last great entitlement program, with the exception of Obamacare, came under George W. Bush. Wait a minute. I was under the impression that if I elected a Republican president, I would have smaller government. And he did not give us smaller government. Here's the point. Perhaps our focus should not be simply on electing Republican presidents, although that's a good thing. Our purpose should be to return those powers where they really belong. So the elections that really matter are state legislatures, not a president. Now, if the Republican Party had that mindset, who holds more than 30 state houses right now? Republicans. Isn't that interesting? Our power is in the states, not in Washington. We should be trying to dismantle that apparatus and get those powers back to the people in the states where they belong. That's when you reclaim control and balance of your constitution of the country. The point of all that is this. 3 simple issues for us to unite around. 3 simple issues to fight for. And we'll leave all those side issues for another day. We'll come back and get those. But until you elect men and women that believe in decentralization, federalism, and a high moral tone, you can argue till the cows come home, and you'll never implement your policy. Those 3 issues can unify our movement. That's when the United Conservative Fund was founded. We're looking for a way to unite, focus that messaging, and elect people that believe just as we do. And if you do that, you'll have success. Yeah. Any questions? As you can see, I get a little passionate about these issues. And, you know, it's so funny, and I'm the radical, right, because I want to balance a budget.
First of all, Paula's delivery, you're, really sharp, and I think you are speaking to some things that need to be talked about. So I got 2 questions, if you don't mind. Well, first of all, I don't know about the questions. What I'd like to say is, like, what Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. And he was connected to anti-federalist papers. And I think really what you're speaking to is more of an anti-federalism, less a federalism. So the aid that helped you do that research, you might want to consider having me come over and be an intern.
No, listen, I do get the distinction, but the proper term in our constitutional system is still federalism. That's
it is the problem.
No, not the problem. That is the technical legal term. Let me give you my background.
Okay.
Let me give you my background. Let me make more sense. First in my class, come to federal law clerk for 2 years, just like Ted Cruz. Private practice for 15 years, constitutional law being, I was my state's lead attorney for Obamacare.
You go.
Federalism is the proper term, the way we traditionally understand it. You're on something else, and you're right, because it confuses people. He's right in the sense that the anti-federalists were actually raising all of these pertinent questions then that we're raising now. And if you look back at history, you think, boy, those anti-federalists were really profound in their ability to kind of predict the future. The federalism is still the proper term, the way our legal system portrays it, but the anti-federalist versus the federalist fight kind of corrupts that term a bit. I once used it online, and I said, we need more federalism. And somebody says, No, it didn't more states' rights.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly what federalism means. It means more states' rights. It's just,
Really?
it really does,
Yes.
under our system. It's just the anti-federalist approach challenged the way those terms were used. I'll give
Versus
you,
nationalism.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'll give you another term that's been misused over the years. Do you know what you all really are in your hearts? You're not conservatives, you're what they used to call classical liberals.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, that's right.
You are a bunch of classical liberals. Isn't that crazy? The terms switched over the years. And you,
Yeah.
The left has changed meanings of a lot of things.
they really have. I used to think progressive was a good word.
Yeah.
Now I'm not so
Well,
sure.
you know, Teddy Roosevelt, like, it seemed like they had some, points to make.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Here's the thing, the Roosevelt. If you want to talk about the real point in time where we lost our Constitution, it was in, well, let's go back a little further. Woodrow Wilson's the first big problem.
Oh, yeah.
The era of progressivism, right?
Yeah.
He gave us a bunch of war, he gave us a bunch of income taxes, and he took away our right to appoint our senators, didn't he?
And the Fed Reserve.
Right, and those three issues are really profound for today's purposes. But now in '37, FDR changed everything.
Oh, yeah, that
And
deal.
he did it through his court system. Do you know the first few laws that were pushed through, the courts were declaring unconstitutional? And do you know that one of the justices decided to switch his vote? Now, they joke about it now, they call it the switch in time that saved 9. Roosevelt was threatening to pack the court, remember?
With 5 more.
That's right. The theory goes that one justice was very concerned about the Supreme Court's place in history. I guess a lot like Roberts was with the Obamacare decision. And they give us the switch, right? Now, all of a sudden, all of these acts that had been unconstitutional, the courts rubber stamped it. And it started with the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is the great clause by which everything's been rammed down our throats for 70 years. You know that, right?
Yes.
Now, here's what it used to mean. In its simplest form, Texas should not have been creating barriers to trade with Louisiana.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And Congress said, you really can't have barriers of trade because if you have a trade barrier or a tariff or whatever, that creates conflict. And conflict starts shooting, right?
Right.
All right. So we all knew what trade was, and we knew what commerce was. The Supreme Court changed that for us in the 1930s. Get this. What if I told you that a farmer that raised all of his wheat in state, only in state, and did not sell any of it out of state? What if I told you that he tried to challenge Roosevelt's price and wage controls on farming? And the Supreme Court said, no, farmer, doesn't matter that you didn't sell your corn. The fact that you weren't purchasing corn in the aggregate creates a commerce effect.
He didn't sell any of
He
it.
didn't sell
There
it.
was
He was
the chicken
consuming.
case too, there was the chicken case, the chickens.
Very similar one, that's right. Now, the court looks at this and they basically build inference on top of inference on top of inference. Now, anything affects commerce. Anything. And that began to be the problem, because it used to be Congress couldn't act unless it had a specific delegation of authority. And for 70 years, Congress were just saying, it affects commerce. And the court said, well, yeah, sure it does. So everything they did, they said it affects commerce. And that's how the Constitution became not a constitution.
Oh, and federal highways were another good one. There's a federal highway going through your town, so we got jurisdiction.
Well, another good one, Obamacare. Now, I was my state's lawyer for that case with Phil Bryant. And get this now, we fight that thing with an eye toward one individual. That's Justice Kennedy. We were under the impression that Kennedy was going to be the swing vote, because Kennedy, he's been a swing vote forever, right? So everything that we do, we're arguing to Kennedy, thinking we've got Roberts in the back. So this opinion comes down on my birthday.
Oh my God.
You don't love this. You know, Twitter's a bad thing, right? Now, I'm sitting in front of my computer at the law firm, and I see the opinion pop down. I try to read it, and like the first 10 pages were incredible. And what Roberts was doing, he was talking about the limits of the Commerce Authority, and he was bringing it back to scope. And I stopped what I was doing because I thought we had won. And I tweeted something like, now what, Pelosi, what are you gonna do now, right? And I kept reading. Now get this. Your Supreme Court justice says on one hand that your federal government is a government of limited powers, right? And it says because it's limited powers, the Commerce Clause can't be quite as big as the government's arguing now. But then, however, he said, the taxing authority allows the government to place a penalty on inaction. Let's put it another way. If the government tomorrow theoretically were to tell you, you must work out 3 times a day, and if you don't, they'll penalize you $1,000. That is, according to the court, a constitutional act under the taxing authority. And if the government can tell you that, is it limited?
No.
There's nothing they can't touch as long as they put a penalty to it and justify it under the taxing clause. So Robert writes this beautiful opinion, and then he screws it up. Carves out the general rule, makes a new general rule. Yeah, the Commerce Clause has limitations, but apparently the taxing authority does not. Scalia asked him from the bench, he goes, what if you telling me we would have to eat, if the government said we have to eat broccoli 3 times a day, we would have to? And the government's attorney basically conceded that that is part of, they could theoretically do that. That the point of stopping it would be political in nature, not legal. That's odd to me. Yes, sir.
Did that bill originate in the Senate? And if
No.
it did, is it unconstitutional?
I would think so. The courts haven't given that argument much credibility.
It doesn't matter, John Boehner's the one that has to bring it up anyway.
Yeah. That's a fair point.
Well,
It is.
but any revenue bill has to originate in the House of Representatives.
That's what the document says. Huh?
Imagine that.
That's what it says.
Seems pretty clear to me.
Change laws.
We have to call it, thank you.
Oh, man.
Wouldn't you love to be here?
That's,
Happy
no,
to
that's
be here.
great. That's great.
This is what we're around a donation bucket for the United Conservatives Fund. So if you can write your checks to that amount, and we'll just start passing this around, the ones going from that side and the back.